The crystal chandeliers of Maravello on the bay dripped light like frozen diamonds, each one probably worth more than my car. The air, thick with the scent of truffle oil and old money, felt too rich to breathe. I clutched my small, imitation leather purse, my knuckles white, and followed the maitre d' across a sea of polished marble. Every footstep echoed, a small, insignificant sound in the symphony of clinking glasses and confident, low-pitched conversations. I was an urban planner who spent her days arguing about zoning laws for sustainable infrastructure. This world of opulent excess was as foreign to me as a distant planet. Trevor was 35 minutes late. I took my seat at the small table overlooking the glittering waters of San Pilar's Bay. The city lights a smear of color against the encroaching twilight. I smoothed the fabric of my simple navy dress, a practical choice for a woman who valued function over form. Around me, women in silks and satins laughed, their voices like chimes. I caught a glimpse of their shoes, blood-red stilettos with glossy soles, shoes that announced their arrival. My own heels, a sensible pair of black pumps I'd found on a clearance rack, suddenly felt like anchors dragging me down. I tucked them under my chair, out of sight. When Trevor finally arrived, he brought a gust of cold air and the faint, cloying scent of a perfume that wasn't mine. He was all apologies and dazzling smiles, the kind he used to close deals for his green investment firm. He looked handsome in his tailored suit, his blonde hair perfectly coiffed, but as he leaned in to kiss my cheek, I saw it, a faint, shimmery smudge of nude lipstick, right there on the crisp white collar of his shirt. My heart gave a painful thud, a single, heavy beat against my ribs. I wanted to point to it, to let my voice rise and crack the perfect, fragile atmosphere of the restaurant, but the faces at the surrounding tables, smooth and curious, were already turning our way. So I did what I always did. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth, forced a smile, and pretended not to see it. Keeping the peace was easier than facing the storm. "Sorry, babe. The traffic was a nightmare," he said, sliding into the chair opposite me. He didn't look sorry, and he looked exhilarated, his eyes bright with an energy that had nothing to do with me. He snapped his fingers for the waiter, a gesture so arrogant it made my skin crawl. "A bottle of the Brunello di Montalcino," he announced, his voice a little too loud, projecting for the benefit of the nearby tables where tech moguls and real estate tycoons dissected the city's future, the 06. The waiter, a man with tired eyes, nodded stiffly. I looked at the wine list. The price next to that name was more than my monthly rent. A cold knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. "Just water for me, please," I said quietly. Trevor waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense, Lila. We're celebrating." Celebrating what I asked, my voice flat. "The future," he said, his smile wide and empty. He launched into a monologue about a new development deal, using jargon I knew was mostly fluff, designed to impress rather than inform. I nodded along, my gaze drifting. That's when I saw them, tucked away in the most secluded corner of the dining room, a private alcove they called the Arcobaleno room, sat 3 men. They were cut from a different cloth than the rest of the patrons. Their suits were dark, impeccably tailored, but worn with a stillness that was more menacing than any display of wealth. They didn't talk much. They watched. The man in the middle, especially. He had dark hair, a strong jaw, and eyes that seemed to absorb all the light around them. There was a dangerous gravity to him, an aura of cold, quiet power that made the boisterous laughter of the tech bros seem childish and hollow. I'd heard whispers from a city hall contact about the man who really ran the docks, the one who decided which ships came in and which ones stayed out. The whispers called him Dominic Caravelli. Looking at the man in the corner, I had no doubt it was him. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. It was like touching a live wire. I felt a jolt, a primal sense of being seen, and I quickly looked away, my cheeks burning. The wine arrived. Trevor made a show of tasting it, swishing it around in his glass, making the sommelier wait. My phone buzzed in my purse. I ignored it. I was trying to hold on to the last frayed thread of this evening, this relationship. But the world had other plans. Trevor Kane. The voice was sharp, crystalline, and full of fury. A woman with hair the color of platinum ice stood by our table. She was poured into a shimmering blue satin dress, her face a mask of beautiful rage. Her name was Sarah Voss, a socialite whose face was often in the San Pilar society pages. I recognized her immediately. Trevor froze, his wineglass halfway to his lips. "You promised you'd leave her," the woman said, her voice carrying across the now silent restaurant. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me. "You promised me it was over." The sound of silverware stopped. Every eye in Maravello on the Bay was on us. A hot, suffocating wave of shame washed over me. I felt like I was shrinking, dissolving under the weight of their stares. "Sarah, this isn't the time or place," Trevor hissed, his face pale. He reached across the table and his fingers clamped around my wrist, a desperate, painful grip, a silent command to stay put, to play my part. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene," she laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You're the one living a lie." My phone buzzed again, insistently this time, numbly. I pulled it out from under the table. It was a notification from my father's bank account. I had access to help him manage his finances, a small task for his only daughter since his retirement from the fire department. A notification banner glowed on the screen, unusual activity alert. A $5,000 processing fee has been charged by a third-party lender. My blood ran cold. I scrolled back through the history, the authorization date for this new line of credit. It was the same day Trevor had come over to my dad's house, asking him to sign a trial power of attorney form. He'd said it was a test run for a new digital security platform for seniors, a pro bono project his firm was doing. My father, a man who trusted too easily, had signed it. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The lies, the late nights, the lipstick on his collar. It wasn't just about another woman. It was so much worse. A sudden commotion broke my trance. The waiter, unnerved by the drama, stumbled. A silver platter tilted. A dish of rich red tomato sauce arced through the air and landed squarely on the front of my dress. The shock was absolute. The warm, sticky mess soaked through the fabric, a scarlet stain of humiliation. That was it, the final straw. I couldn't breathe. I ripped my wrist from Trevor's grasp and scrambled to my feet, knocking my chair over with a loud clatter. "Lila, wait!" Trevor called after me, but his voice was drowned out by the roaring in my ears. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to escape the hundreds of eyes that felt like they were boring into my back. I pushed past a velvet rope into a hallway marked "Private." My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. The hallway was dimly lit, silent. I fumbled for a door, any door, and pushed it open, desperate for a place to hide. The room was quiet, and it was occupied. The three men from the corner were there, seated around a dark wood table. A half-smoked cigar rested in an ashtray, its thin ribbon of smoke curling towards the ceiling. The two men flanking the one in the center tensed immediately. One of them, a man with a scarred eyebrow, let his hand drift inside his jacket. But the man in the middle, Dominic Caravelli, didn't move. He just lifted a single finger, a minute, almost imperceptible gesture. The other man's hand froze. Caravelli's eyes, dark and unreadable, settled on me. It wasn't a leering gaze, not the way other men looked. It was an assessment. His eyes took in my trembling hands, my flushed face, the ugly red stain blooming across my chest. He saw everything. He saw a mess. The door burst open again. "Lila, for God's sake, what are you doing?" Trevor panted, grabbing my arm. He tried to pull me back into the hallway, his face a mask of panic. Slowly, deliberately, Dominic Caravelli rose to his feet. He wasn't exceptionally tall, but he filled the space, his presence commanding the very air in the room. When he spoke, his voice was a low, quiet rumble, laced with an accent that was part New York Italian, part something older and rougher. He wasn't speaking to me. He was speaking to Trevor. Don't look at her again." It wasn't a shout, it was barely above a conversational tone, but the words landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. The air crackled with sudden, terrifying tension. Trevor's face went white as a sheet. His hand, which had been gripping my arm like a vice, fell away as if he'd been burned. Caravelli's gaze shifted to me. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer now, but no less commanding. "Lila," I managed to whisper, my throat tight. "Lila Hart." He gave a slight nod, then glanced past me toward the doorway, where the restaurant manager was hovering, wringing his hands. "Fine, miss. Hard a room to compose herself. And my compliments to the chef, but her party's bill is to be taken care of. Send it to my office." His tone left no room for argument. The manager scurried away. I stood there, frozen, caught between the wreckage of my life in the hallway and the unnerving calm of this man. I felt his eyes on me, and then he spoke again. The words directed at me this time. A quiet, chilling command. "Don't look at him again." It was a piece of advice, a warning, and an absolution all at once, in his gaze. I felt both the strange comfort of protection and the terrifying vulnerability of being seen for exactly what I was: broken, humiliated, and utterly alone. One of his men stepped forward and gently closed the door, shutting me out. The heavy wood clicked shut, and the silence of the private hallway enveloped me once more. Outside that door, in the glittering, merciless dining room, the city of San Pilar spun on, oblivious and uncaring, as if nothing had happened at all. The manager led me not to a ladies' lounge, but to a private suite on the second floor of the restaurant. The door, heavy oak, closed behind me with a soft, definitive click, shutting out the world. The room was the opposite of the chaotic dining hall below. It was a sanctuary of quiet luxury. A single, vast window framed a panoramic view of the San Pilar Bay. The water a sheet of black silk embroidered with the lights of the city. A fire crackled in a low, modern fireplace, and the air smelled of leather and old books. I stood in the center of the room, my ruined dress clinging to me, the smell of tomato sauce a sickly sweet reminder of my public disgrace. A moment later, the door opened again. It was Dominic Caravelli. He moved with a quiet economy of motion, his dark suit seeming to absorb the firelight in his hands. He carried a folded, steaming white towel. He didn't say anything. He simply walked over and held it out to me. My first instinct was to recoil, but his gaze was steady, impersonal. I took the towel. It was hot and damp, scented with lavender. I pressed it to my face, the warmth a shocking comfort against my cold skin. When I lowered it, I saw him watching me, his expression unreadable. "Trevor Kane is using your father," he said. The words were flat, devoid of pity, a statement of fact. "He leveraged your father's identity to secure a loan. It wasn't for a green energy fund. It was for a ghost entity called the Urban Wave Marshland Restoration Fund." I stared at him, the warm towel clutched in my hands. The name sounded plausible. Exactly the kind of thing Trevor would invent. I don't understand." "It's a washing machine," he continued, his voice low and even. "A rival organization, the Black Lantern Syndicate, is funneling money through a new marina development on the South Docks. They needed a local, clean front to make the initial capital look legitimate. Kane was their bridge. He got your father, a retired civil servant with a perfect credit score, to be the guarantor." He paused, his dark eyes fixed on mine. "The problem is, you're Mr. Kane got greedy. He skimmed a significant fee for himself off the top. Now the loan is in default. The syndicate is out of pocket, and they are all looking for someone to hold the bag. That someone is your father, Ray Hart." Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling the reality I thought I knew. Ray Hart. He knew my father's name. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling as I stabbed at my dad's contact number. It rang once, twice, then went to a busy signal. My heart hammered against my ribs. He never turned his phone off. He's not answering. The words came out as a panicked whisper. Dominic reached into his jacket and produced a sleek, featureless black phone. It was heavy, solid. He slid it across the polished surface of a nearby table. Try again with this. I looked from the phone to his face. What is this? A conversation they can't listen to. I picked it up. It felt cold and alien in my hand. I dialed my father's number again. This time, it went straight to his voicemail. The pre-recorded sound of my dad's cheerful, steady voice. "You've reached Ray. Leave a message," made a lump form in my throat. "He's still not answering," I said, my voice trembling. "He will be fine. For now," Dominic said. "They want the money, not a mess." He gestured to one of the leather armchairs by the fire. "Sit down, Lila." I obeyed without thinking, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. He remained standing, a dark silhouette against the glittering cityscape. "The situation is simple," he said, getting straight to the point. "The Black Lanterns are using this marina project to poison my harbor. Trevor Kane was their useful idiot, and now you and your father are their collateral damage. I have an interest in seeing the syndicate's operations disrupted. You have an interest in keeping your father out of a federal prison and away from men who solve financial disputes with more than just lawyers." He let that sink in. The implication was as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. "I'm proposing a protection agreement," he said. "My family will absorb your father's fraudulent debt. We will make it disappear. The men looking for their missing money will be redirected. In return, you will work for me." My head snapped up. "Work for you? I have a job. I'm an urban planner." "I know what you are," he said calmly. "That's why I want you. The Black Lanterns are exploiting zoning variances, environmental impact loopholes, public land use statutes, all the fine print the city council is too lazy or too corrupt to enforce. You know that world. You know how to read the maps, how to find the structural weaknesses in their plans. You will show me where they are vulnerable. You will give me the legal ammunition to dismantle their marina project from the inside out." The audacity of it took my breath away. He wanted to turn my life's work, my passion for building better, sustainable communities, into a weapon. "I'm not a spy," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and indignation. A flicker of something, maybe amusement, crossed his face. "I'm not asking you to be. You're a fixer. You fix broken systems. This one," he gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the harbor, "is broken. I'm asking you to fix it." My phone. My own phone buzzed on the table beside me. It was a string of frantic texts from Trevor. "Lila, where are you? We need to talk. Don't do anything stupid. That guy is dangerous. You don't want me to get angry. I have files on your firm. Lila, all the corner cutting, the permit violations. I can ruin you." I stared at the screen, a fresh wave of despair washing over me. Dominic glanced down at the illuminated screen. "He has pictures of your team lunches and a few falsified spreadsheets," he said, his voice laced with contempt. "He is a child throwing a tantrum. Forget about him." As if on cue, there was a soft knock on the door. One of the men from the other room, the one with the scarred eyebrow, entered. He carried a large, elegant black box from a high-end boutique and a leather bill folder. He placed both on the table and retreated without a word. Dominic opened the box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a simple, impeccably cut black dress. He then opened the bill folder. He slid the receipt across the table to me. The total was astronomical, a figure that made my stomach clench. At the bottom, in neat, decisive script, was a signature. A credit card slip was attached, paid in full. The company name, Caravelli Maritime Logistics. He was erasing my night, rewriting it from a position of absolute power. He was solving my problems, but he was also creating a debt I could never hope to repay. I had to know. I had to draw a line, to understand what I was stepping into. I lifted my chin and met his gaze directly. "Are you a criminal, Mr. Caravelli?" He held my gaze for a long moment, the firelight dancing in his dark eyes. The air grew thick, charged with an unspoken energy. He took a step closer, and my breath caught in my chest. "I am a businessman," he said, his voice a low murmur. "And I am the man who protects this harbor from men who are far, far worse." The answer was everything and nothing, a denial wrapped in a confession. Before I could process it, my phone rang again. Not Trevor this time. The number was blocked. I hesitated, then answered, putting it on speaker. "Is this Lila Hart?" a man's voice asked. It was smooth, professional, but with an undercurrent of steel. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Agent Thompson with the Federal Integrity Bureau of Commerce. We've been made aware of certain financial irregularities connected to your father's accounts. We'd like you to come in and speak with us tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. It would be in your best interest to cooperate." The line went dead. The FIBC, it was a new agency, one that the old guard at City Hall grumbled about constantly. They had a reputation for being relentless. They were coming for my father. A cold dread, deeper than anything I had felt all night, settled over me. I looked at Dominic Caravelli, a man who represented a world of violence and shadows, and for the first time, I saw him not as a threat, but as the only solid thing in a world that was rapidly falling apart. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a simple, heavy cardstock business card. It bore only his name and a number. He placed it on the table next to the secure phone. "Go to your meeting," he said. "Answer their questions honestly. Tell them what you know about Trevor Kane. But if they so much as touch your father tonight, if a car so much as slows down in front of his house, my men will get there before they do." He turned and walked to the door. Pausing with his hand on the knob, he shrugged off his suit jacket. It was a beautifully tailored charcoal wool. He draped it over the back of the chair next to me. "It's cold out," he said simply. Then he was gone. I sat there for a long time, the silence of the room pressing in on me. I changed into the new black dress. It fit perfectly. I picked up his jacket. It was heavy, warm, and smelled faintly of cedar wood and something else, something clean and masculine. It felt like armor. When I finally walked out of the suite and down the grand staircase, Trevor was waiting in the lobby. He rushed toward me, his face a mess of desperation and anger. "Lila, we have to talk. You can't just walk away with him." Before he could reach me, Dominic appeared at the top of the stairs, and he didn't say a word. He didn't even look at Trevor. He simply caught my eye and gave a nearly imperceptible tilt of his head. Instantly, 2 burly security guards materialized at Trevor's elbows. "Sir, I think it's time for you to leave," one of them said, his voice politely firm. They steered a protesting Trevor toward the main doors. I watched him go, a ghost from a life that had ended only an hour ago. And then I turned my back, wrapped Dominic Caravelli's jacket tighter around my shoulders, and walked out into the cold night air. For the first time, I was the one who chose not to look. The secure phone Dominic had given me rang a little after 3 in the morning, a jarring electronic shriek that cut through the heavy silence of the suite. My heart leaped into my throat. I snatched it from the nightstand. It was a man's voice, calm and professional, but the words he spoke sent a spear of ice through my veins. "Miss Hart, my name is Marco Silvi. I'm with Mr. Caravelli's security detail. There's been an incident at your father's residence. My dad, is he okay?" I was already out of bed, my mind racing through 1,000 terrible possibilities. "He is unharmed, ma'am," the voice assured me, a steadying presence in my panic. His home security system was tripped by a forced entry on a back window. The intruders fled the moment the alarm sounded. Nothing appears to be taken. But Mr. Caravelli has insisted that your father not remain there alone. I am en route to his house now to escort him to a secure location." "Secure location where?" "Villa delle Mare, the Caravelli estate on the hill. We'll be there within the hour." The line went dead. I stood in the dark, the city lights below seeming cold and indifferent. This was no longer about money or humiliation. They had gone to my father's house, the small, quiet home he'd lived in for 40 years, the place where I grew up. They had crossed a line that was sacred. An hour later, I was waiting in the grand marble-floored entryway of a sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion that clung to the highest point of San Pilar's wealthiest hill. Villa delle Mare. The air here was different, cleaner, smelling of salt and pine from the manicured gardens. A man in a simple, dark uniform stood discreetly by the door. On his sleeve was a stylized silver shield with the word Argo embroidered on it. A sleek black SUV crunched up the gravel driveway. The man named Marco stepped out from the driver's side. He was younger than I expected, with kind eyes but a posture that suggested he was coiled steel. He opened the back door, and my father emerged. Ray Hart looked tired and angry, but blessedly he was in one piece. His old firefighter's jacket was zipped up to his chin, and he carried a small duffel bag. I ran to him, throwing my arms around him. He hugged me back, his embrace still the safest place I'd ever known. "I'm okay, Lils," he murmured into my hair. "Just a broken window and a good scare. These guys," he nodded toward Marco, "are very efficient." Dominic Caravelli appeared from a hallway, not with the menace of the night before, but with the quiet authority of a man in his own home. He was dressed in simple dark trousers and a gray cashmere sweater, looking more like a tech CEO than a port boss. He nodded to my father. My dad, never one to be intimidated, met his gaze squarely. Ray Hart had spent 3 decades running into burning buildings. He wasn't afraid of a man in a nice sweater. "I don't know what kind of trouble my daughter's gotten mixed up in, Mr. Caravelli," he said, his voice gravelly. "And frankly, I don't care about your business, but I'm accepting your hospitality for one reason." He took a step forward. "As long as you're protecting my daughter. You and I have an understanding." Dominic's expression didn't change. "And Your Honor, Mr. Hart," he replied, his voice soft but clear. "They tried to tarnish your good name. That will not stand." My father seemed to consider this, giving a single, sharp nod. It was an agreement between 2 men who understood the world in terms of clear, unforgiving lines. Over the next few hours, the villa became our gilded cage. Marco explained that Argo Shield was the official name of Caravelli's security firm, a fully licensed and bonded corporation that handled executive protection and corporate security for half the businesses on the waterfront. It was a legitimate front for a private army. My new reality was punctuated by the arrival of an official-looking courier. He delivered a crisp envelope containing a formal summons from the Federal Integrity Bureau of Commerce. The language was cold, bureaucratic, and filled with veiled threats. It was a summons for me to provide testimony in a federal investigation into port-side corruption, and it strongly implied that Dominic Caravelli was their primary target. My cooperation, the letter suggested, would be viewed favorably when they began to scrutinize my father's recent financial entanglements. They were trying to squeeze me from one side while the Black Lantern Syndicate pushed from the other. I found Dominic in a large, book-lined study overlooking the sea. He was looking at a series of satellite maps displayed on a massive digital screen. He didn't seem surprised by the summons. "They need a villain to justify their budget," he said. Without turning around, he pointed to a section of the map showing the tidal flats near the proposed marina, and they are looking in the wrong place. He tapped the screen, and a series of bank transfers and Shell Corporation diagrams appeared. Here is the proof. The Urban Wave Fund isn't just a ghost entity, it's a pipeline. The syndicate is using it to launder money by overinflating construction costs and environmental mitigation fees. They're billing the city for wetland restoration that will never happen, using materials that don't exist. He finally turned to face me. The FIBC is chasing ghosts. They're looking for strong-arm tactics and contraband when the real crime is happening in plain sight, buried in building permits and environmental impact reports. That is a language they don't speak. But you do. He was right. I could see the patterns in the data, the subtle manipulations of zoning law that I would have spotted in a heartbeat at my old job. He wasn't asking me to be a criminal. He was asking me to be an urban planner. "All right," I said, the word tasting strange and momentous. "I'll help. But I have conditions." He inclined his head, waiting. First, I won't speak to you directly about the details of the case. All communications will go through a proxy. Marco Silvi seems capable. I was building a wall, a layer of professional distance. And I need a lawyer, someone who understands this, who works for you but will represent my interests. He nodded slowly. Ariana Vec. She's the best maritime lawyer in the state. She'll be here within the hour. Your conditions are acceptable. He paused, then added, I have one of my own. What is it? Your safety is now my responsibility, which means your movements are my concern. You will not go anywhere alone after dark. Any public appointments or meetings you have must be cleared through Marco's team first. No exceptions. It was a cage, but it was a safe one. I agreed. The deal was struck. And then I thought of my apartment, my laptop, my research files, the hard copies of the estuary planning maps that contained a decade of my work. There's something I need, I said, testing the boundaries of our new arrangement. I have to go back to my apartment. My professional files are there, the original survey maps for the river mouth. I need them. I expected him to send Marco, to delegate instead. He picked up a set of keys from his desk. I'll take you, he said simply. You? I like to handle important things myself. The car was a Maserati Grecal, a beast of an SUV that purred through the city streets with an understated menace. We drove in silence. When we pulled up to my modest apartment building, the familiar brick facade looked alien, a relic from another life. Dominic killed the engine, and in the sudden quiet, we both saw it. The light in my third-floor apartment was on. Dominic was out of the car before I could even process what it meant. He moved with a startling speed. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, I scrambled after him. My front door was ajar, the lock splintered. Inside, the scene was one of quiet violation. My books were swept from their shelves, my cushions overturned, and in the middle of my small living room, crouched over a box of my files, was Trevor. He looked up, his face pale and frantic. Lila, I was just looking for my watch. I thought I left it here, he stammered, scrambling to his feet. Dominic didn't say a word. He simply moved to stand between me and Trevor. He was a solid, immovable wall. The air crackled, thick with a violence he held perfectly in check. Trevor, for all his bluster and arrogance, was a coward at heart. He looked at Dominic, and something in him seemed to collapse. He visibly shrank, taking a stumbling step backward. Get out, Dominic said, his voice a low growl. Trevor didn't need to be told twice. He practically fell over himself, scrambling for the door, not even daring to look at me as he fled. I stood there, shaking, looking at the mess he'd made. Dominic's hand rested for a brief moment on my shoulder. Get what you came for, Lila. I went to my desk, my hands working on autopilot. I grabbed my laptop, my external hard drives, and most importantly, the heavy roll of cartography tubes containing the original estuary maps. As I gathered my things, Dominic walked through the small apartment, his eyes taking in the details of my life, the framed photos of my dad and me, the well-worn novels, the slightly wilting plant on my windowsill. He was seeing the woman behind the planner. The drive back to the villa was different. The silence was no longer tense, but contemplative. Dominic switched on the stereo, and the cabin filled with the soaring, heartbreaking notes of an Italian opera aria. My mother, he said quietly, his eyes on the road. She loved this music. She ran a small bakery in the old neighborhood down by the docks. Woke up at 4 every morning to make the bread. She used to say you could tell the character of a man by the quality of the bread he ate. He was silent for a moment. That was before the port became a casino, and the bread started tasting like cardboard. It was the first piece of his own story he had offered, a small, unguarded glimpse behind the armor. It was a story of loss, of something pure being corrupted. It made the space between us feel a little smaller, a little warmer. When we returned, my father was sitting on the wide stone terrace, a blanket over his knees, staring out at the dark water. He watched as Dominic walked me to the door. Later, as I was getting my dad a cup of tea, he looked past me, his gaze fixed on Dominic, who was now speaking quietly with Marco on the far side of the lawn. "You're suited to fire, that one," my father said, his voice a low rumble. I looked at him, confused. He took a sip of his tea, his eyes never leaving Dominic. "A man like that, he's like a blaze. You spend your life learning how to handle it. You learn how to contain it, and you learn when you have to let it burn to clear the dead wood." I followed his gaze. Across the lawn, Dominic must have felt us watching. He looked over, his eyes meeting mine for a moment before shifting to my father. He offered no grand gesture, no bravado. He simply gave a small, almost imperceptible smile and turned back to his work. The invitation arrived on a piece of cardstock so thick it felt like a tile. The San Pilar Opera Circle's annual gala, held in the grand ballroom of the Halcyon Meridian Hotel. It was the social apex of the city's calendar, a place where fortunes were pledged and political futures were decided over canapes and champagne. It was also, Dominic informed me, the one place where all his enemies would gather under a flag of polite truce. He didn't ask me to go. He stated it as a fact, a necessary move on the chessboard. "We need to be seen," was all he said. The dress arrived 2 hours before we were scheduled to leave. It came in a garment bag from Lucia Ferretti, an exclusive atelier I'd only ever read about in magazines. There was no note. There didn't need to be. The dress itself was the message. It was a column of shimmering silver sequins, simple in its cut, but devastating in its effect. It was both a piece of armor and a declaration. When I put it on, I didn't feel like an urban planner playing dress-up. I felt like a version of myself I hadn't met yet, one who wasn't afraid to take up space. When I walked down the main staircase at the villa, Dominic was waiting at the bottom. He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, the stark black and white making him look even more formidable than usual. He looked up, and for a moment, he didn't move. He didn't look at the dress. He looked at the way I stood in it. It was the look of a harbor watching the tide come in a force of nature it didn't seek to control, only to welcome home. The air in the grand entryway grew still, charged with an unspoken acknowledgement. He held out his arm, and I took it. The Halcyon Meridian was a palace of light and sound. Music from a string quartet drifted from the ballroom, mingling with the murmur of 100 conversations. The air was perfumed with expensive florals and ambition. I felt the familiar pang of being an outsider, but it was different this time. With Dominic's hand resting lightly on my arm, the stares we received weren't ones of judgment, but of curiosity and calculation. We were a power couple, whether we intended to be or not. We were making our way toward the terrace when a man stepped into our path. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with silver-streaked hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I knew instantly who he was. Valerio Ross, the head of the Black Lantern Syndicate. "Caravelli," Ross said, his voice smooth as polished granite. He gave me a brief, dismissive glance, an unexpected pleasure. "Ross," Dominic replied, his voice flat and cold. "I see you're still allowed in civilized company." Ross's smile widened, showing a row of perfect white teeth. "The port is a beautiful thing," he said, his gaze flicking back to Dominic. "It would be a shame to see it change hands over something as crude as a gun. The law, however, the law is a much sharper blade, and it's a blade that cuts in my favor these days." He gave a slight, mocking bow and melted back into the crowd. It was a declaration of war, delivered with a smile. Before I could process the cold threat, a woman with a brisk, professional air approached me. She had a no-nonsense haircut and a sharp pantsuit. "Lila Hart, I'm Nora Pell, from the FIBC." My stomach tightened. I glanced at Dominic, but his expression was impassive. "I just wanted to introduce myself," Pell said, her tone friendly but her eyes analytical. "I've read some of your work on municipal sustainability. It's brilliant. We're on the same side. You and I, We both want to protect this city's natural resources from predatory developers. She leaned in a little closer. Some people, like Mr. Caravelli here, use the port for their own gain. We're trying to stop that. If you ever feel like you're in over your head, my door is always open. Think of me as an ally. It was a perfectly crafted trap, an offer of help that was really a fishing expedition, an attempt to drive a wedge between me and Dominic. Thank you. Agent Pell, I said, my voice steady. I'll keep that in mind. She gave me a tight smile and moved on, but I could feel her eyes on us long after she was gone. Dominic's hand moved from my arm to the small of my back, a subtle pressure that anchored me. Breathe, he murmured, his voice too low for anyone else to hear. And then I saw him, across the room, trying to blend in near a potted palm, was Trevor. He was dressed in an ill-fitting suit, a stark contrast to the tailored perfection around him. He looked haggard, desperate. In his hand, he was clumsily trying to conceal a small digital voice recorder. He was a snake in a garden of vipers, and somehow he was the most pathetic creature here. Dominic followed my gaze. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His hand on my back became a shield. "Stay close to me," he ordered quietly. Trevor must have gathered some pathetic scrap of courage because he started moving toward us, his path a weaving, uncertain line through the crowd. He looked like a man walking toward his own execution. As he drew near, Dominic didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He simply leaned down, his lips close to my ear, but he spoke loud enough for the three of us to hear. His voice was a quiet, final judgment. Don't look at him again. This time was different. The first time he'd said it, it had been a command born of my humiliation. The second, a piece of advice. This time, it was a shared statement of fact. The shame was gone, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. I looked up at Dominic, a small smile touching my lips. "I have no intention of it," I said. Trevor froze a few feet away, the words hitting him like a physical slap. He saw the finality in my expression, the wall of Dominic's presence, and he faltered. He turned and scurried away, disappearing into the glittering throng. Just then, the music shifted. The quartet struck the opening chords of a waltz. Without a word, Dominic took my hand and led me toward the dance floor. His hand was warm and firm against my back. Not a possessive grip, but a steady anchor in a swirling sea of enemies. He was a surprisingly graceful dancer, leading with a quiet confidence that made it easy to follow. We moved together, a silent island in the center of the crowded room. We didn't speak. The music did the talking, and for 3 minutes, the rest of the world, the threats in the room and the dangers outside simply ceased to exist. As the final notes faded, he leaned in again. "You keep rhythm," he murmured, his breath warm against my cheek, like you keep a coastline. It was the most profound compliment I had ever received. He led me off the floor and toward a set of French doors that opened onto a wide stone balcony. The cool night air was a welcome relief. Below us, the city lights of San Pilar spread out like a carpet of scattered jewels. "Pell is dangerous," I said, breaking the spell. "She's trying to use me to get to you." "I know," he said, his gaze fixed on the harbor in the distance. "And Ross is overconfident. He thinks he can win this with lawyers and lobbyists." "He can," I said, "unless we prove his entire project is fundamentally unsound, legally unsound." I finally had his full attention. "Those maps I brought from my apartment, they're not just zoning documents. They're detailed hydrographic surveys of the river mouth. Going back 50 years, they show the natural patterns of erosion and sediment deposition." I stepped closer to him, my voice filled with the passion I had for my work. The Black Lantern's marina plans, the ones they submitted to the city. They're fraudulent. They used outdated data to make it seem like their dredging and construction would have minimal environmental impact. But my maps prove otherwise. They prove the new jetties will accelerate shoreline erosion. threatening the foundations of the public ferry terminal within 10 years. It's a violation of at least 3 city ordinances and 2 federal environmental protection statutes. If we present this to the City Council's Oversight Committee, they'll have no choice. They'll have to revoke the permit. He listened intently, his dark eyes searching my face in the moonlight. He wasn't just seeing a woman he was protecting. He was seeing a partner, a strategist. We can build a legal case that will bury them, he said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. From across the ballroom, Valerio Ross stood by the windows, a glass of champagne in his hand. He watched us on the balcony. His eyes narrowed to slits. He couldn't hear our words, but he could read the intent in our posture. He caught the eye of a burly man with a flattened nose standing near the bar, Nico Prada, one of his key enforcers. Ross gave a subtle lift of his chin in my direction. The message was clear: watch her. Miles away, in the quiet safety of the villa, my father sat in his favorite armchair, watching the gala on a live stream on his tablet. The local news channel's camera panned across the dazzling crowd, then zoomed in for a moment on the dance floor. It settled on me, smiling in Dominic Caravelli's arms. Ray Hart leaned forward, his weathered face a complex mixture of deep, paternal worry and a flicker of undeniable pride. He was watching his little girl dance with a wolf, and for the first time, he realized she wasn't afraid of his teeth. The days that followed the gala blurred into a marathon of caffeine and legal jargon. Ariana Vec, Dominic's lawyer, was a force of nature. She was a petite woman with a mind like a steel trap and a vocabulary that could fillet a corporate shark in seconds. We commandeered the villa's library, transforming its antique mahogany table into a war room. We worked around the clock, fueled by coffee brought in by silent staff, surrounded by my hydrographic maps, city planning codes, and environmental statutes. We were building a fortress of facts, a case so airtight that the Black Lantern Syndicate would suffocate under the weight of its own legal violations. My life was now a meticulously scheduled operation. I never went anywhere alone. Marco Silvi, with his calm eyes and ever-present watchfulness, was my shadow. Whether I was meeting with a former colleague at a cafe to discreetly inquire about permit filings or simply walking in the villa's gardens, a member of the Argo SHIELD team was always there, a silent, reassuring presence at the edge of my vision. It was a gilded cage, but the threat outside was real enough that I was grateful for the bars. The threat from the other side arrived not with a bang, but with a formal, legalistic whimper, a subpoena from the FIBC delivered by a stone-faced federal marshal. It was addressed to me, but the real target was my father. The document stated that if I failed to provide substantive cooperation in their ongoing investigation of Dominic Caravelli, a new inquiry would be opened into historical discrepancies in the San Pilar Fire Department's pension fund during my father's tenure as captain. It was a fabrication, a phantom crime conjured from thin air, but it was a dagger aimed straight at my heart. I stormed into Dominic's study, the paper trembling in my hand. He was on the phone, his voice low and hard. He saw my face, said a final, curt word, and ended the call. "They're going after my father," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "They're threatening to ruin him over nothing." A dangerous stillness settled over him. I could see the instinct in his eyes, the immediate primal urge to meet this threat with overwhelming force, to cut the head off the snake in the way he knew best. "They've made a mistake," he said, his voice a low growl. "I'll handle it." "No," I said, surprising myself with my own firmness. I stepped closer, placing the subpoena on his desk. "That's what they want. They want you to react, to do something rash that they can use against you. They want to paint you as the monster. We can't let them." I looked him straight in the eye. "We have to beat them the right way, my way, with the law. We are so close. Dominic, the case we're building will not just stop the marina. It will expose the entire money laundering scheme. It will make them look like fools. But I need you to be patient." He stared at me, his jaw tight. For a long moment, I thought he would refuse. I was asking a lion to act like a fox. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. Patience, he repeated, as if tasting a foreign word. For you. Lila, I'll wait. 2 days later, Marco was driving me to a meeting with Ariana at her downtown office. The afternoon sun glinted off the water as we drove across the Petrel Bridge, the main artery connecting the city's north and south sides. I was reviewing some documents in the back of the armored sedan when I felt the car lurch violently. I looked up to see a massive rust-colored dump truck with no license plates barreling down on us in the adjacent lane. It swerved sharply, its huge metal bumper aiming for our rear quarter panel, trying to spin us out and into the bridge's guardrail. "Hold on," Marco shouted, his voice impossibly calm. He wrenched the wheel, the tires screaming in protest, the sedan fishtailed, the back end swinging perilously close to the edge. I could see the long drop to the cold, churning water below. The truck came again, a relentless hulk of steel. Marco slammed the accelerator, the engine roaring. Sparks erupted from under the car as metal scraped against the concrete divider, the sound a horrific shriek. Just as the truck was lining up for another, final push, a black Maserati Grecal appeared as if from nowhere, rocketing up the bridge from the opposite direction, driving against traffic. Horns blared around it, but it didn't slow. Dominic. He cut across 2 lanes of traffic and positioned the SUV directly behind the truck, blocking its path, pinning it. The truck driver, seeing his escape route cut off, slammed on his brakes. The chase was over. Marco guided our damaged sedan into an industrial park a quarter mile past the bridge, a desolate landscape of shipping containers and warehouses. Dominic's SUV was right behind us. The moment our car stopped, my door was pulled open. Dominic was there, his face a granite mask of controlled fury. He didn't say a word. He just reached in, his hands gentle but firm on my arms, and pulled me out of the car. He led me away from the others, tucking me into the narrow space between 2 towering stacks of steel containers, shielding me from view. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and raw. I shook my head, unable to speak. My whole body was trembling, a delayed reaction to the adrenaline and terror. He saw my shaking hands and reached out, his own hands warm and steady as he enveloped mine. He looked down at them, a muscle feathering in his jaw. When he looked back up at me, his eyes were black with a cold, terrifying rage that wasn't directed at me, but at the world that had dared to touch me. "From now on," he said, "each word a vow carved in stone. No one touches you." Marco and another Argo shield guard had apprehended the truck driver, a low-level thug who was clearly terrified, while they dealt with him. Dominic's men searched the cab of the truck. They didn't find a weapon. They found something far more insidious. A leather briefcase was tucked under the passenger seat. Inside was a meticulously crafted set of forged documents, shipping manifests, bank transfers, emails, all designed to perfectly frame Caravelli Maritime Logistics for the Black Lantern Syndicate's crimes. It was a plant. The attack wasn't meant to harm me physically. It was meant to get these documents into the hands of the police, with me as the convenient witness. And then Marco made the final discovery. He dusted the briefcase for prints. "We've got a match," he said, looking at Dominic. The prints belonged to Trevor Kane. The name hung in the air, a final, pathetic betrayal. It wasn't just that he had cheated on me and used my father. He had actively tried to set me up, to use me as a pawn in a game that could have gotten me killed. Back in the safety of Dominic's study, he handed me the secure phone. "Call him," he said. I dialed the number I now knew by heart. Trevor answered on the first ring, his voice reedy and nervous. "Hello." "It's Lila," I said, my voice as cold and dead as I felt inside. I heard him suck in a breath. "Lila, are you okay? I heard that there was an accident on the bridge." "Cut the act." "Trevor," I snapped, "your fingerprints are all over the briefcase. Why?" He was silent for a moment. Then the truth came pouring out in a pathetic, whining rush. "They made me do it. Lila, the FIBC, Agent Pell. She came to me after that night at the restaurant. They had me dead to rights on the fraud charges. They were going to send me away for years. She offered me a deal, a reduced sentence, maybe even probation, if I agreed to be a confidential informant. I was supposed to plant the evidence, make it look like Caravelli's men tried to take you out to silence you. Pell promised she'd have a team nearby to rescue you and find the files. She said no one would get hurt. Dominic stood by the window, his back to me, listening to every word from the speakerphone. He was unnervingly still. I could feel the violence radiating from him, a palpable force he was holding back with sheer iron will. He wasn't breathing. He was waiting. "You tried to use me," I whispered, the reality of it finally sinking in. "You put me on that bridge." "I'm sorry, Lila, I didn't know what else to do," he cried. I looked at Dominic's rigid back. I knew what he wanted to do. He wanted to find Trevor and erase him. But as I watched him, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, he slowly, deliberately relaxed them. He turned around, his face grim but his eyes clear. He walked over and gently took the phone from my hand, ending the call. He looked at Trevor's number on the screen, then handed the phone back to me. "Block him," he said, his voice quiet. "Delete the number." I stared at him. "That's it after what he did?" "He's a pawn," Dominic said, his gaze locked on mine, a desperate rat in a trap. "He can be dealt with later. What I need right now is more important than what I need him to pay for." "What's that?" I asked. "I need you to be safe." That night, sleep was 1,000,000 miles away. I lay in the dark, the screech of tires and the image of the oncoming truck playing on a loop in my mind. Every creak of the old house made me jump. Just after 2 a.m, my own phone, which had sat largely unused on the nightstand, lit up with a single text message. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was from. The message contained only 3 words. "Sleep. I'm watching." A profound sense of calm washed over me. I closed my eyes, and for the first time all night I felt the anchor of safety. He was out there, a guardian in the darkness. The next morning, I went out onto the terrace for some air. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold in the sprawling courtyard below. I saw a sight that made me stop. My father, Ray, was in his sweats, doing push-ups on the manicured lawn. Flanking him, matching him set for set, were 2 of the large Argo shield guards, their usual stoic expressions replaced by looks of grim determination. My dad, the old fire captain, was running drills with his daughter's bodyguards. A new circle of trust was being forged in the early morning light, a strange and unlikely family brought together by shared purpose, with me at its protected center. The air in the city council chamber was thick with tension and the smell of old paper. I stood at the podium, my voice steady as I walked the council members through the final hydrographic projection. The laser pointer in my hand was a tiny red sun, tracing the catastrophic path of erosion the Black Lantern Marina would cause. Across the room, their high-priced lawyers shuffled their papers, their faces grim. They had come prepared for a fight about zoning, not a masterclass in fluvial geomorphology. When I finished, a silence fell over the room. The council chairman, a man whose political career was built on indecision, cleared his throat. "In light of the compelling evidence presented by Miss Hart," he announced, "this council votes to immediately suspend all permits related to the South Docks Marina project, pending a full environmental and infrastructural review." A quiet gasp went through the room. We had won. It wasn't the end, but it was a staggering blow to Valerio Ross. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. As Ariana Vec gave my shoulder a triumphant squeeze, my eyes found Dominic in the back of the room. He was standing near the exit, flanked by 2 of his men, a silent, imposing figure. He hadn't moved during the entire 2-hour hearing. Now, he simply nodded at me, a flicker of acknowledgement, before turning and disappearing into the crowd. Later, as Ariana and I were mobbed by journalists on the steps of City Hall, Dominic's car pulled up to the curb. Marco got out and cleared a path for us. Before I got in the car, Dominic himself stepped out, in full view of the cameras and the curious eyes of San Pilar's elite. He walked over to me. "You did well, Lila," he said, his voice a low rumble that was for my ears only. He extended his hand. I took it. His grip was firm, his palm warm. It was a simple, professional handshake, but it lasted a beat too long. His thumb brushed against my knuckles, a fleeting, electric touch. It was a public claiming, a silent message to everyone watching she is with me. Then he released my hand, nodded to Ariana, and got back in his car. That evening, a storm rolled in from the bay. A soft, persistent rain began to fall, tapping a gentle rhythm against the villa's tall windows. The victory felt distant now, replaced by a quiet, restless energy. I was standing in the library, staring out at the darkening gardens, when the lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the house into a deep, velvety blackness. A moment later, the emergency lights kicked in, casting long, eerie shadows down the hallways. A figure appeared in the doorway. It was Dominic, holding an old-fashioned oil lamp, the flame dancing and casting a warm, golden glow on his face. "The main generator is being difficult," he said, his voice calm in the sudden quiet. "Come with me. There's a place I want to show you." I followed him through the silent house. The only sounds were the whisper of our footsteps on the marble floors and the ever-present drumming of the rain. He led me out a side door and along a covered stone path into the gardens. At the far end of the lawn stood a structure I hadn't noticed before, a large Victorian-style glass house. He pushed open the heavy iron door, and we stepped inside. The air was warm and humid, thick with the scent of damp earth, night-blooming jasmine and orchids. The rain was louder in here, a mesmerizing, rhythmic patter against the thousands of panes of glass in the domed roof. It felt like we were in a bubble, a secret world hidden within the storm. He called it the opaline glass house. He set the lamp down on a small wrought iron table. In its flickering light, I could see a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. He poured a small amount of the amber liquid into each. "Pasito di Pantelleria," he said, handing me a glass, a sweet wine from a small island. My mother used to say it tastes like captured sunlight. I took a sip. It was exquisite, sweet and complex, a taste of a sun-drenched place far from the rain-soaked night. He stood a few feet away, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, his posture relaxed but still maintaining a careful, respectful distance. He was giving me the space. He was waiting for me to close it. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the music of the rain. This man had saved my father, protected me, and given me the weapons to fight my own battles. But I was still his asset, a piece on his board, kept safe in his fortress. The victory today had been mine, yet I had returned to his protection. I needed more. I needed a different arrangement. I set my glass down on the table, the small click echoing in the quiet space. I looked at him, my reflection a faint ghost in his dark eyes. "I don't want you to protect me like an asset. Dominic," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I don't want to be a liability you have to manage. I want to walk beside you." He didn't move, but something in his expression shifted. The stillness in him deepened. He took a single, deliberate half-step toward me, closing the distance by a fraction. His eyes searched mine, asking a silent question. It wasn't a question of desire, but of permission. It was a question I had been waiting my whole life to answer. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, my silent answer. The world narrowed to the space between us. He moved slowly, giving me every chance to retreat. He raised his hand, not to my face, but to my shoulder, his fingers warm through the thin fabric of my dress. And then he leaned in and kissed me. The kiss was impossibly gentle at first, a soft exploration, a question asked with his lips instead of his eyes. My hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, powerful beat of his heart beneath my palms. He slid his other hand to the small of my back, a warm, solid pressure that drew me closer. The force of his hold only increased when I leaned fully into him, surrendering to the pull I had been fighting for weeks. Our breathing synchronized, a quiet rhythm that matched the rain outside. He pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against mine. I opened my eyes and found his gaze, dark and intense. I reached up, my fingers tracing the line of his collarbone. He watched my hand as if mesmerized. Then he reached up and gently, deftly, pulled the single pin from my hair. My carefully constructed bun unraveled, my hair tumbling down my back like a sudden cascade of water. A rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, and the rain began to fall harder, a frantic drumming on the glass roof above us. We both smiled at the same time, a small, shared moment of amusement in the heart of the storm. "Slowly," I whispered, the word a prayer against his lips. "Always," he murmured back, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. His lips traced a path from my temple, down my cheek, pausing at the corner of my mouth before finding it again, this time with a deeper, more profound certainty. His suit jacket, forgotten, slipped from his shoulders and fell silently onto a nearby chaise lounge. Our fingers intertwined, my smaller hand lost in his. Just then, with a low hum, the backup generator finally kicked in. A string of soft, low-wattage emergency lights flickered on around the perimeter of the glass house. They cast us in a soft, ethereal glow, two silhouettes holding each other close. A single entity against the storm. The light was just enough to see the raw honesty in his eyes, the complete absence of any pretense. He drew me over to the chaise lounge, pulling a thick wool blanket from its back. He sat down, pulling me down with him, arranging me so my back was against his chest, my head tucked under his chin. He wrapped the blanket around both of us, a warm, secure cocoon. His arms encircled me, and I could feel the rise and fall of his chest with every breath. He leaned his head down, his lips brushing against my hair. "You're safe," he whispered. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed it. My entire body relaxed into his hold. I closed my eyes, a genuine, peaceful smile gracing my lips as I listened to the sound of his heart beating steadily beside my ear. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, not speaking, just breathing. When we finally did talk, it wasn't about the case, or our enemies, or the danger. We talked about limits and freedom. We built a new contract between us, not with lawyers and clauses, but with whispered words in the dark. "Every decision that affects you, we discuss first," he said. "No more assumptions, no more commands." "And if I say no," I asked, my voice soft. "Then the answer is no," he said without hesitation. "And if I tell you there is danger, you will listen. You will step back." "A partnership," I said, testing the word. "A partnership," he confirmed. Outside the glass house, hidden in the shadows of a large cypress tree. Marco Silvi stood in the rain, a small, satisfied smile on his face. He watched the two silhouettes in the warm light of the greenhouse, then turned and walked silently back toward the main house. "Finally," he muttered to the rain. "The boss can finally breathe." The peace of the new morning was a fragile, beautiful thing. I woke to the scent of rain-washed earth and the memory of Dominic's arms around me. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt a flicker of hope, a sense of solid ground beneath my feet. That ground shattered at dawn. The roar of engines tore through the morning quiet, followed by the percussive slam of car doors. I looked out the window to see a convoy of black sedans and SUVs swarming the villa's long driveway. Men in dark blue jackets with FIBC emblazoned in bold yellow letters were pouring out, their movements crisp and aggressive. The raid had begun. By the time I was dressed and downstairs, the house was crawling with federal agents. They were professional, but their presence was a violation. Their methodical search of every room, a calculated act of intimidation. My father stood with Marco in the entryway, his face a thundercloud of fury. Dominic was in the library, standing perfectly still as he watched two agents rifle through his desk, and with him, a cool and collected Ariana Vec was already examining the warrant. Agent Nora Pell found me near the grand staircase. She held a file in her hand, her expression one of polite, predatory concern. "A difficult morning, Miss Hart," she said, her voice low. "It didn't have to be this way. My offer still stands. You can be a confidential consultant, a witness, help us put an end to all this unpleasantness, and we can make sure the investigation into your father's pension fund never sees the light of day." I looked at the chaos around me, at the armed men turning Dominic's home inside out based on a lie. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard anger. This was her game. These were her rules. "You want to play by the rules, Agent Pell," I said, my voice quiet but unshakable. "Fine. Let's play by the rules. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with her useless threats. In the library, Ariana was holding the warrant up to the light, a small, intense frown on her face. "It's good," she said, her gaze flicking between the document and Dominic. "The signature from Judge Albright looks right. The seal from the Caldera County Court is in place." She paused, then took out her phone and snapped a high-resolution photo of the seal. She zoomed in, her eyes narrowing. "Wait a minute." She showed the screen to Dominic and me. "Look at the edge of the seal," she said, pointing to a tiny, almost invisible area of digital pixelation. A real stamp embosses the paper. It bleeds slightly into the fibers. This is a scan, a high-quality one, but it's a digital copy, reused from another document. It's a masterful forgery. She looked up, a grim smile on her face. "And it's a known tactic of the Black Lantern Syndicate's legal team. They've been caught doing it once before in a civil case. Nora Pell didn't come here with the law. She came here with Valerio Ross's playbook. The raid was illegal, but the damage was already being done. As if on cue, my phone began to buzz with notifications, a local news alert from the San Pilar Ledger. I opened it. The headline was a gut punch. "Urban planner linked to reputed port boss and city hall corruption probe." Below it was a grainy, zoomed-in video clip. It was me, standing on the steps of City Hall after the hearing, taking a document file from one of Dominic's men. The clip was cleverly edited, cutting just before Dominic himself appeared, making it look clandestine, secretive. The accompanying article was a masterpiece of innuendo, painting me as a compromised official, a port-side mistress using my influence to do Caravelli's bidding. Valerio Ross had fired his shot, not with a gun, but with a character assassination. The fallout was immediate and brutal. An email arrived from the CEO of my former company, Lila. "In light of the ongoing federal investigation and the recent media reports, we are placing you on an indefinite suspension to protect the firm's integrity. We wish you the best." They were cutting me loose, throwing me to the wolves to save themselves. In the space of 3 hours, I had lost my name, my career, and my professional standing. I stood there in the violated library, the world crashing down around me. For a moment, I felt the familiar, suffocating pull of despair. Then I looked at Dominic. He was watching me, his expression dark and unreadable, waiting to see if I would break. I thought of my father, his honor threatened. I thought of the night in the glass house, the promise of a partnership. I straightened my shoulders. I would not break. "Ariana," I said, my voice clear and loud, "call a press conference. Right here, on the front steps, now." She blinked, then a slow, admiring smile spread across her face. "What's the topic?" "The topic," I said, "is illegal sand dredging." An hour later, I stood on the top step of the villa, a makeshift podium in front of me. A swarm of news cameras and reporters gathered on the lawn below. The FIBC agents were still there, a captive audience to their own public humiliation. I wasn't the woman from the doctored video. I was an expert, and I was angry. "My name is Lila Hart," I began, "and for the last 10 years, my job has been to understand how this city works. While the FIBC has been wasting taxpayer money raiding private homes with forged warrants, a real crime has been happening in plain sight." On a large monitor set up beside me, I projected a series of satellite images. time-stamped over the last 6 months. They had been provided, I announced, by the Harborline Security Council, a civic oversight group Dominic's legitimate businesses help fund. These images show a fleet of unmarked barges, owned and operated by a shell corporation linked to the Black Lantern Syndicate, illegally dredging sand from the public estuary every single night. They are destabilizing the entire shoreline to use that sand as cheap, unregulated filler for their fraudulent marina project. This isn't about corruption, it's about theft on a massive scale, from every citizen of San Pilar. I laid out the evidence, the tonnage, the environmental impact, the specific statutes they were violating. I didn't just defend myself. I went on the attack. Using my expertise as a weapon, I turned their smear campaign into a story of corporate greed and federal incompetence. That night, the victory felt sharp and clean. The news was all about the sand, about Ross's illegal operation. I had changed the narrative. I was sitting with my father in the study, a quiet sense of triumph settling over us. When Marco entered the room, his face was pale, his expression grim. He walked directly to Dominic, who was standing by the fireplace. He spoke one sentence, his voice too low for me to hear. But I saw Dominic's reaction. He didn't shout, he didn't swear, he didn't move a muscle. All the warmth, all the emotion drained from his face, leaving behind something cold, hard, and terrifyingly calm. It was the calm of the abyss. He turned to me, his eyes black holes. Valerio's men just took your father. My blood ran cold. What Dad's right here? Dominic's gaze flickered to my father, then back to me. No. Lila, they took him from the grounds. He went for his evening walk along the perimeter path, just like he does every night. They were waiting for him in the woods just beyond the wall. The world tilted on its axis. The man sitting beside me, the man I had just shared a cup of tea with, was a decoy, one of the Argo shield men, a double. A precaution Dominic had put in place that I hadn't even known about, a precaution that had just failed. Dominic turned to Marco. "Lock it down," he said, his voice devoid of all inflection. "Lock down the entire port. Nothing gets in or out. No ship leaves its berth. No container moves. Nothing. Choke this city until I get him back." Marco nodded once and left to carry out the order. Dominic was already moving, shrugging on a dark jacket, his movements fluid and deadly. I scrambled to my feet, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I'm coming with you." He stopped and turned to face me. He didn't argue or dismiss me. He just looked at me. A long, searching gaze. He saw the terror in my eyes, but he also saw the steel beneath it. He was weighing his promise to keep me safe against the reality of the partnership we had forged. He was deciding if the woman he had held in the glass house could survive the world he truly lived in. Finally, after a lifetime of silence, he gave a single, sharp nod. "You stay with me," he said, his voice a low, hard command, "but you stay half a step behind me, always." The drive to the South Docks was a silent, high-speed descent into hell. The city lights blurred into streaks of neon, each one a stark reminder of the normal world we had left behind. We stopped a block away from Warehouse 47, a monolithic block of rust and corrugated steel hunched at the edge of the pier. The air was thick with the smell of salt, diesel, and decay. Sickly yellow sodium lights cast long, distorted shadows, and the only sound was the rhythmic slap of waves against the barnacle-encrusted pilings. Dominic's team, the core of Argo's shield, moved with the quiet, deadly efficiency of a wolf pack. They were dressed in dark, functional gear, their faces set and grim. Dominic gathered us in the shadow of a stack of shipping containers. He unrolled a blueprint of the warehouse onto the hood of the SUV. "It's a simple box," he said, his voice a low, controlled rumble. "One main entrance, 2 loading bays on the east side, a personnel door in the back. Ross will have the front covered. He'll expect a full frontal assault." He looked at Marco. "You take your team, go in silent through the rear personnel door, breach and clear the ground floor offices." Then he looked at me. I expected to be told to stay in the car, to be a spectator. Instead, he handed me a lightweight earpiece and a tablet displaying the same blueprint. "You're with me," he said, "but you're our eyes." My mind raced, connecting the blueprint to a memory. My dad, years ago, spreading out old city plans on our kitchen table for a historical society presentation. He'd been a firefighter then. These old warehouses. He'd told me, tracing a faint line with his finger. They all had bricked-over fire routes from the 20s. The city sealed them for code, but the bones are still there. "There's another way in," I said, my voice coming out stronger than I expected. I pointed to a section on the blueprint, the west wall. It's a double layer of brick. There should be a hollow space, an old emergency corridor that leads right behind the main office block on the ground floor. It's not on the official plans. Dominic and Marco exchanged a look. There was no disbelief, only a quick, reassessing respect. Dominic nodded at Marco. "You heard her. Find the corridor." He turned to me. "Stay on this channel. You are his guide." We moved into position. Marco's team melted into the shadows around the back of the warehouse. Dominic and I took cover behind a stack of rotting pallets, a direct line of sight to the main entrance. A small drone, nearly silent, lifted into the air, feeding a thermal image to my tablet. I could see the heat signatures of guards, maybe a dozen of them, concentrated near the front. The opening move was a soft, percussive thump that seemed to shake the very air, a breaching charge on the back door. It wasn't a loud explosion, just a contained, violent shockwave. A moment later, a voice, amplified and distorted, boomed from speakers mounted on the warehouse roof. It was Valerio Ross. "Caravelli, I knew you'd come. A man of passion." The voice was slick with arrogant amusement. "The deal is simple. Sign over your shipping interests, the whole damn port, and I'll let the old man go home. Refuse, and he pays for your pride." Dominic keyed the mic on his wrist. His voice cut through the night, cold and absolute, broadcast back through a speaker on one of his own vehicles. There are no bargains made with blood. On my tablet, I directed the drone's camera toward the second-floor windows. Through a grime-caked pane of glass, I saw him. My father. He was tied to a chair, but he was upright, his head high. He looked directly at the drone, and his hand, which was tied in his lap, moved. His fingers twitched 3 times, a quick, almost imperceptible flash. It was our old signal from when I was a kid, a game we used to play. "I'm okay. 3 hostiles." "Marco," I whispered into the earpiece, my heart pounding. "My father is on the second floor, northeast corner office. He's confirmed 3 guards in the room with him." I scanned the blueprints on the screen, my mind working, connecting the dots my father had taught me. Follow that corridor. It should end at a ventilation shaft. The main electrical junction for this section of the building will be right below it. Do you see it? "Affirmative," Marco's voice crackled back. "I see the junction box." "Cut the power," I commanded. "On my mark." I watched the thermal signatures of Marco's team moving into position. "Now, Marco, now." A section of the warehouse plunged into absolute darkness. A chorus of confused shouts erupted from inside. This was our chance. In the chaos, Dominic grabbed my arm. "Let's move." We ran, low and fast, across the open ground toward the massive sliding door of a loading bay. The inside of the warehouse was a cavern of shadows and noise. Men were running, blinded, their flashlights cutting useless beams through the darkness. The air was electric with tension. Suddenly, a gunshot, deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. A bullet ricocheted off a steel beam somewhere above us with a high-pitched whine. Before I could even react, Dominic was there. He tackled me, not to the ground, but sideways, pulling me behind the solid protection of a massive concrete support column. His body was a shield, pressing me against the cold concrete. His arm wrapped around me, his head up. Scanning the darkness, the smell of cedar and gunpowder filled my senses. He looked down at me, his eyes asking the question he didn't have time to speak. "Are you okay?" I gave him a hard, emphatic nod. He squeezed my shoulder once, then released me, melting back into the shadows. It was over in minutes, using the darkness and my guidance. Marco's team swarmed the upstairs office. There was the sound of a brief, brutal struggle. And then Marco's voice came over the comms. "Asset is secure. We have him." A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. But Valerio wasn't finished. A single, powerful spotlight snapped on, illuminating the mezzanine level that ran along the far wall. Valerio stood there, and next to him was a camera on a tripod, a bright red recording light glowing. He was live streaming. See, his voice boomed, no longer amplified by the PA system, but by the acoustics of the warehouse. See the violence of Dominic Caravelli, an unprovoked attack on a legitimate place of business. He brings war to our city. And then, as if on cue, the main doors of the warehouse rolled open. A team of FIBC agents, led by Nora Pell, strode in. They were armed, tactical, but they didn't move to intervene. They stopped just inside the entrance, their weapons held at a low ready. They were spectators. She was waiting, letting the two sides bleed each other out so she could sweep in and claim the victory. My mind raced. She thought she held all the cards. She didn't know what I had done that morning. I saw the open microphone Dominic had used, lying on a crate where he'd left it. I lunged for it, flicking the switch. My voice, clear and amplified, rang through the entire warehouse, overriding Valerio's rant. Agent Nora Pell. Every head, including Pell's, snapped in my direction. "You stand there in the name of federal integrity," I called out, my voice ringing with a conviction I didn't know I possessed. "If your agency is truly here to uphold the law, then I have a lawful order for you. Seize the assets of the Black Lantern Syndicate. This morning, I filed a detailed legal brief with your office, complete with satellite evidence and financial records, proving they are engaged in a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation through illegal dredging. The documents are time-stamped. The evidence is on the public record. Do your job." A stunned silence fell. Pell was trapped. Her calculated inaction was now exposed as complicity in front of her own agents and, thanks to Valerio's camera, the entire internet. Her face was a mask of fury. Before she could respond, Dominic stepped out of the shadows. He walked calmly into the center of the floor, unarmed, his hands open. In one hand, he held a small, black USB drive. He looked directly at Nora Pell. "You want to end this? Here's how." He held up the drive. "This is everything. The syndicate's complete, unedited ledgers. Their offshore accounts, their payroll of corrupt city officials. Every dirty dollar. It's all yours." He took a step closer, and in exchange, you will grant full public immunity to Ray Hart, and this entire matter will be settled in a public, transparent hearing. No more backroom deals, no more forged warrants. It was a checkmate, with Valerio's camera recording every second. Pell was caught between her own illegal machinations and Dominic's offer of the very prize she had been after. To refuse would be to expose her own corruption. To accept would be to legitimize Dominic. Her eyes darted from the USB drive to Dominic's face, then to me. The decision was made for her. With a curt, angry gesture, she signaled one of her agents forward. "I accept the terms," she said, her voice tight with suppressed rage. Dominic tossed the USB drive to the agent. The exchange was made. The battle for the warehouse was over. A much larger war had just begun. In the chaotic aftermath, as the FIBC agents reluctantly began processing Valerio Ross's men, a scuffle broke out near the loading bay doors. It was Trevor. He'd been hiding like a rat in the rafters and was trying to slip away, but one of Marco's men had him by the collar, and he was a double-crosser of the highest, or perhaps lowest, order. As Nora Pell's agents questioned him, the story unraveled in a pathetic torrent of confessions. He wasn't just Pell's informant. He had also been selling information about the FIBC's investigation to Valerio Ross, playing both sides against the middle, hoping to skim enough cash to disappear before the whole house of cards came down. He wasn't a pawn. He was a parasite, feeding on the conflict he helped create. They cuffed him, his cheap suit rumpled, his face smeared with grime. As two officers from the San Pilar Marshal Service began to lead him away, his eyes found mine across the cavernous warehouse. A desperate, pleading look filled his face. "Lila," he cried out, his voice cracking, "don't let them do this. You know what Ross's people will do to me in prison. Please don't let them hand me over to him." All the anger, all the hurt he had caused me, had burned away, leaving behind only a cold, empty space. I looked at the man who had stolen my trust, used my father, and put my life in danger, and I felt nothing but a profound and final sense of closure. I walked toward him until I was only a few feet away, close enough for him to see that there was no pity in my eyes. "You had so many chances to do the right thing." "Trevor," I said, my voice calm and even, "you've run out of chances." He seemed to crumple, the last bit of hope draining from him. As the marshals pulled him toward the exit, he cast one last terrified glance over his shoulder at Dominic, who had been watching the exchange in silence. Dominic didn't sneer. He didn't make a threat. He simply met the lead marshal's eye and spoke, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a judge's sentence. "Keep him alive. Justice doesn't need a grave." The message was clear. Trevor's punishment would come from the system he had tried to manipulate, not from a shiv in a dark corner. It was a fate, in some ways. Far worse for a man like him. Trapped by the live camera and the undeniable evidence of the USB drive, Nora Pell had no choice but to seize control of the narrative, standing amidst the debris of her failed operation. She announced to the press that, based on the new evidence provided by Mr. Caravelli, the FIBC would be convening an emergency public hearing. The hearing, she declared, would be overseen by a panel of independent observers from the Northwest Standard, the city's most respected newspaper, to ensure full transparency. Valerio Ross would be compelled to attend and answer to the allegations. It was a brilliant pivot, a desperate attempt to recast herself as the champion of justice, rather than a compromised agent who'd been thoroughly outplayed. Back at the villa, the adrenaline of the night gave way to a heavy, bone-deep exhaustion. My father was safe, examined by Dominic's personal doctor and now sleeping soundly upstairs. The immediate threat was gone, but the final battle loomed. I found Dominic in his study, staring at the city lights. He was turning his mother's wine glass in his hand, the last of the captured sunlight gone. "You did it. Lila," he said, not turning around. "You gave Pell the high ground, and she took it. The hearing is her stage now." "It's our stage," I corrected him. He turned to face me, his expression grim. "No, it's hers and Ross's. You've done enough. You brought the evidence to light. Now you need to step back. Let Ariana handle the hearing. Stay here where you're safe." A familiar chill went through me. We had come so far, forged a partnership in the rain and in the fire, and yet his first instinct was still to put me back in the gilded cage. "I'm not a spectator. Dominic," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "I'm not the asset you protect. I'm the one who found the evidence. I'm the one who understands it. This isn't a fight you win with force. This is my fight. It's fought with maps and signatures and the rule of law." "And what happens when the law isn't enough?" he shot back, his voice rising with a raw, protective anger he rarely showed. "What happens when Ross decides a witness is more dangerous than a lawyer? I will not have you on the front line, Lila. I will not have you be a target." I've been a target since the moment Trevor put that lipstick on his collar. I stepped toward him, my own anger flaring to meet his. The difference is, now I can fight back. You asked me to trust you. I am asking the same of you. Trust me to handle this. Trust that my weapons are just as sharp as yours. We stood there, toe to toe, the air crackling with the force of our two worlds colliding. His instinct was to shield, mine was to stand and fight. It was the central conflict of our entire relationship, laid bare in the quiet of his study. He saw the unshakable resolve in my eyes, the same resolve he valued in himself. The anger in his expression slowly faded, replaced by a look of frustrated, profound respect. He closed the distance between us in a single step, his arms coming around me, pulling me into a fierce, almost desperate embrace. It wasn't a hug of comfort, it was a collision. I wrapped my arms around him, holding on just as tightly. "Between the bullets," he murmured into my hair, his voice thick with emotion. "We trust each other between the bullets. It was his way of surrendering, of agreeing. It was his promise." Later that night, I was in the library, sketching out the opening for my testimony, when my father came in. He was in his robe, looking more rested than he had in weeks. He sat down across from me, his expression serious. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver object. It was his old captain's pin from the SFD, the one he'd worn for 20 years. He slid it across the table to me. "Give this to him," he said quietly. I looked from the pin to my father's face. It was more than a piece of metal. It was a symbol of a lifetime of service, of honor, of running into the fire when everyone else was running out. "Dad," I started, unsure what to say. "He brought you home," he said simply. "He brought me home. That's all that matters." I found Dominic on the terrace, staring out at the dark harbor he fought so hard to control. I walked up behind him and pressed the small, cool metal pin into his hand. He looked down at it, then at me, his eyes questioning. "From my father," I said. "He told me to tell you, to bring it back in one piece." Dominic closed his hand around the pin, his knuckles white. He looked toward the library, where he could see my father watching us through the window. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. When he spoke, his voice was rough with an emotion I had never heard from him before. "Thank you, Dad Ray." The acceptance was complete. The circle was closed. The next morning, the Northwest Standard ran a front-page story that included an open letter from Valerio Ross. It was a piece of masterfully written propaganda, full of threats veiled as civic concern, painting Dominic as a blight on the city and me as his willing accomplice. He warned of the chaos that would ensue if the city's established business leadership was disrupted. I read it over Dominic's shoulder as he drank his morning coffee. He just smiled. A cold, thin smile that held no humor. "A dog that's been kicked only barks when you shine a light on it," he said, folding the paper and setting it aside. "He's afraid. Let him bark." I spent the rest of the day writing. I ignored the threatening headlines and the endless legal briefs Ariana sent over. I didn't write about Dominic Caravelli or the Mafia or the FIBC. I wrote the story of a river. I wrote about the tidal flats and the spawning grounds, about the generations of fishermen who had made their living from the water, and about the quiet, slow-motion theft of their legacy. I wrote about my city, not as a collection of buildings and assets to be traded, but as a home. It was the only testimony that mattered. The Topaz Hall was an arena, and I had willingly stepped into the center of it. The room was a sea of faces, stony-faced business leaders in the front rows, weathered fishermen and dockworkers standing along the back walls, and a swarm of journalists packed into the aisles, their cameras like the unblinking eyes of 100 hungry predators. Nora Pell presided over the hearing with a brittle, forced neutrality, a queen surveying a chess match she had already lost. Ariana sat beside me, a bastion of calm, her legal pads filled with the ammunition we were about to unload. Dominic was somewhere in the back, a shadow in the crowd, his presence a silent weight that I could feel even without seeing him. I took a deep breath and began. I didn't speak like a victim or an accuser. I spoke like a city planner. On the massive screen behind me, I brought up the first satellite image. "This," I said, my voice clear and amplified by the microphone, "is the San Pilar estuary 6 months ago, a healthy, thriving ecosystem." I clicked the remote. A new image appeared, showing the first signs of scarring from the illegal dredging. Click. Another image, showing the damage spreading like a disease. Click. A real-time data map, showing the flow of money from the Ghost Urban Wave Fund into a network of shell corporations, controlled by Valerio Ross. Every slide was a hammer blow. I unraveled their entire operation, not with speculation, but with indisputable data. I showed the council the forged environmental reports, highlighting the data points I knew had been copied from a decade-old survey. I showed them the hidden ledgers Dominic's USB drive had provided, a river of dirty money flowing beneath the surface of the city. With every click of the remote, I was hammering another nail into the Black Lantern Syndicate's coffin. The room was silent, captivated. The fishermen in the back were nodding, seeing the proof of what they had known in their bones for months. Then the doors to the hall burst open. Valerio Ross strode in, flanked by a team of expensive lawyers. He was a man cornered, and it made him reckless. "This is a circus," he boomed, pointing a finger at me, a performance orchestrated by my rival, using his mistress to peddle fantasies on the screen. My carefully prepared presentation was replaced by the grainy, edited video of me on the steps of City Hall. The murmuring in the room started again, the seeds of doubt sprouting in the fertile ground of public opinion. But before the lie could take root, Ariana was on her feet. "Objection to the introduction of falsified evidence," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. She handed a tablet to the clerk. "If you examine the metadata of that video file, which my team has already done, you will find it was edited on a computer registered to the Black Lantern Syndicate's corporate headquarters less than 24 hours ago. It is a fabrication, and a clumsy one at that." A wave of whispers rippled through the hall. The press corps erupted into a frenzy of typing. Valerio's face contorted in a mask of fury. He had overplayed his hand, and in his desperation he made his final, fatal mistake. From the group of men standing behind him, one of them, the enforcer, Nico Prada, reached inside his jacket. I saw the glint of dark metal. I saw his hand begin to rise. Time seemed to slow down. Then, a blur of motion from the back of the room. Dominic. He wasn't a man. He was a force of nature, a projectile of pure, protective instinct. He covered the distance in a heartbeat, a blur of black and white. He didn't shout. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply moved, putting his own body between the gunman and me, his back to the threat, his arms pulling me down behind the heavy oak podium. The world exploded into chaos. People screamed, ducking for cover. Before the gunman could even fully raise his weapon, he was neutralized. Marco and two other Argos Shield members, who had been seamlessly blended into the crowd, converged on him with a brutal, silent efficiency. They had him disarmed and pinned to the floor in seconds. In the ensuing pandemonium, Nora Pell finally, decisively, chose her side. Perhaps it was self-preservation. Perhaps it was a flicker of the integrity she was supposed to represent. She stood up, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "Lock down this room. I want Valerio Ross and his associates taken into custody. The charge is domestic terrorism." The FIBC agents, who had been standing by uselessly, finally spurred into action, moving to surround a stunned Valerio. They were doing their job, at last. In the quiet moment after the storm, as I stood up from behind the podium, my heart still hammering in my chest, I looked at Dominic. He was already watching me, his eyes dark with 1,000 emotions. He gave me a single, sharp nod, a silent acknowledgement that our partnership had survived the fire. I turned back to the microphone. My voice didn't tremble. "San Pilar," I said, my words echoing through the shocked silence of the hall, "is not a commodity to be bought and laundered. It is our home." A single person began to clap, then another and another soon. The entire room, the fishermen, the reporters, even some of the business leaders, erupted into a wave of thunderous applause. As the marshals led a cuffed and defeated Valerio away, I saw another procession near the exit. It was Trevor, being escorted out by 2 agents, presumably to be transported to a holding facility. He looked pathetic, a ghost from a life I no longer recognized. He turned his head, his eyes desperately seeking mine, looking for some final, non-existent connection. From his place beside me, Dominic simply tilted his head. He didn't look at Trevor, he looked at me, and he repeated the words that had become our history, our creed. This time, they were not a command, but a final, quiet absolution, a closing of a book that was already finished. Don't look at him again. The fallout was swift and decisive. The South Docks Marina project was permanently canceled. The port's disputed assets were temporarily placed under the control of a new public benefit corporation, the Tidal Trust, with a board comprised of community leaders and environmental experts. My father, Ray Hart, was publicly and completely exonerated of all charges. That evening, the storm had passed, leaving behind a sky washed clean and a cool, salty breeze. Dominic and I stood on a long wooden pier that jutted out into the bay, the lights of the city we had fought for glittering across the water. The silence between us was no longer filled with tension, but with a deep, quiet understanding. "I want you beside me," he said, his voice a low rumble that was almost lost to the sound of the waves. It wasn't a flowery declaration. It was a statement of fact, a business proposal for the heart, free, within the limits we set together. I reached out and touched the front of his jacket, my fingers finding the hard outline of the small, tarnished silver pin he had kept in his breast pocket. My father's pin. "I want a treaty," I said softly, looking up at him, "a promise. Every time I say enough, you stop. You trust my judgment, and every time you say danger, I step back. I trust yours." A slow smile touched his lips, a genuine, unguarded expression that transformed his face. A treaty. He agreed. He nodded, a solemn vow in the deepening twilight. He closed the small space between us, his arms wrapping around me, drawing me into a familiar, safe embrace. He kissed me, and this kiss was different from all the others. It was not born of passion in a storm or the desperation of a fight. It was mature, certain, and calm. It was the sealing of a pact, the beginning of a long peace. It tasted of sea salt and cedarwood, the scent of the port and the man who was its heart. It tasted like home. In the months that followed, a new San Pilar began to take shape. I became the lead technical director for a new Clean Harbor Alliance, a public-private partnership dedicated to restoring the estuary. Argo Shield, now recognized for its professionalism, was awarded a legitimate civil contract to provide security for the city's new port authority. And Dominic, true to his word, began the slow, arduous process of legitimizing his entire logistics chain, cutting away the gray areas one by one. We kept our rituals, sometimes. When a soft rain would begin to fall, we would take one of his boats out into the bay, and he would teach me how to waltz on the gently swaying deck. And every now and then, a fleeting memory of Trevor would surface, a ghost of a man trying to catch my eye. But he was just a shadow now, a story that was over, a face no longer worth looking at. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'm always so curious to know where you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you are, and share your thoughts on Lila and Dominic's journey. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and like this video. And if you really enjoyed it, please consider hitting that hype button to help this story reach even more listeners.